How much control do parents really have over the online content their kids have access to? And is there an appropriate role for government policy to be involved?
We're facing a crisis right now in this country because of it.
On this episode, we discuss the proposed App Store Accountability Act that would help parents have more oversight over their kids' access to app downloads. And we explore the arguments for why this issue warrants government intervention. You're listening to Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nick Dunn, and this week we're talking about an issue that actually affects a lot of us. It's about families and technology. This issue has implications or questions around free speech and innovation and the effect of children participating in online products like social media, and really how we can advance public policy to address some of the concerns about the effects of social media on kids. To have this conversation, I'm excited to welcome into our studio State Senator Todd Weiler.
Thank you. Hello, Nick.
Thanks for coming back to Defending Ideas.
Pleasure to be here.
And also Bill Duncan, who is our Constitutional Law and Religious Freedom Fellow here at Sutherland.
Thanks, Nick.
He's a good fellow.
He is indeed. And also joining us in our virtual studio is Melissa McKay. She's a mom, a child advocate, and a device and online safety expert. She's been doing a lot of work on this issue and this bill. Melissa, thanks so much for being with us on Defending Ideas.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
So let's jump right in, because we're in the middle, or I guess at the beginning of Utah's legislative session. There has, of course, been a lot of debate in recent years around the effect of social media and online content on kids. Sometimes pretty intense debate of what to do about it. Is there a government role? If so, what should it be? And so I want to kind of explore the contours of this debate for our listeners and give them a better way to understand the issue and to talk about it, as they are no doubt talking about these kinds of things in their family with their friends. And Senator, I wonder if we could start with you. You're, of course, the sponsor of Senate Bill 142, the App Store Accountability Act.
Sure.
But I wonder first, you give us the big picture. Why is this issue important?
Yeah, so I hear a lot of people say, well, this is really a parental responsibility, and I agree 100%. But so is teenage drug use with tobacco and alcohol and vaping. And yet nobody's suggesting, well, 7-Eleven shouldn't ask for an ID when someone's buying a six-pack. And nobody's saying, well, we should allow Amazon to ship vaping products to 12-year-olds. Nobody's making that argument, because we all grew up understanding that, yes, it's parental responsibility, but the government's going to come in and help a little bit, and the Motion Picture Association is going to rate a movie. And so if the movie's rated R, the theaters aren't supposed to let 12-year-olds in there. But for some reason, with this digital stuff, it's new and it's fresh, and it kind of snuck up on us. And so people, they kind of draw into their defenses and say, well, how dare you look at Instagram or smartphones? This is a parental responsibility. Well, yes, it is, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be checking IDs just like 7-Eleven does. And so I think that's the big picture. And particularly for this bill, Melissa kind of opened my eyes to the fact that Instagram, which I like and I use, and I think it can, for me, it's been very family oriented. It also contains a lot of filth and a lot of stuff that shouldn't be there. And when Melissa first told me that, I challenged her on that a bit. And then she said, no, you got to look at it like a curious 12-year-old boy, and search for terms that they might be looking, search for. And she opened my eyes to the fact that there was a lot of disgusting material on Instagram, and they're aware of it, and they're not doing anything. In fact, I think they like it. It serves a segment. Now, Twitter, I'll say, has explicit hardcore pornography, and they seem to be okay with that. Instagram doesn't, but it kind of walks right up to that line without crossing it.
So is it kind of, and Melissa, I want to bring you in a second to talk about the bill specifically as well, that you've been involved with these conversations. And then our bill, we'll get to some of the constitutional critiques that people are making in your response to those. But Senator, I want to stay on this for a moment. The way you describe it, it kind of seems to me that aren't people just sort of implicitly making an argument that, well, social media or this online material is not actually that bad for kids? Because you use the argument of drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
Is that where the disconnect is?
I think that they were making that argument 2 or 3 years ago. I think they've surrendered because the data is so overwhelming that it is bad for kids. In fact, I could show you a hockey stick pie graph of hospital admissions for teenage girls, and it was fairly flat for 3 or 4 decades. And then as soon as social media became, effervescent, it just went straight up. And it's teen suicides and other things like that, because it's amazing how these, the TikToks and the Snapchats of the world, how they can get under the kids' skin, and they make them feel like they're a loser and everybody else is just having this wonderful life.
And it's not just kind of obscene content, but also the impact on mental health, on depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation.
Absolutely. We're facing a crisis right now in this country because of it.
So, Melissa, I'd love your take on, with that kind of overview that Senator Weiler provided and the work that you've done on this issue, talk a little bit more about the specific intervention that's before us, that's before the state and the legislature in the form of this bill. Why is this the right intervention, and why is it the right step for right now?
Sure, happy to speak to this. So I've been doing device safety and online stuff for about 7 years. And very early on, I think every child advocate thinks, oh, well, education is the answer. You have to educate people. And that is part of it, but there is a lot that parents don't understand. And that's what the first part of this bill talks about, having accurate age ratings. And Senator Weiler touched on this a little bit. Instagram is rated 12 plus, Snapchat is rated 12 plus. There's a lot of apps that are misrated, so parents don't really have the full story. So there was a recent expose in the Wall Street Journal, and they looked at 1,000 different apps, and they found that 1/4 of them were misrated. So they're misrepresentations of what was on the app. And the reason that happens is that there's no third-party industry group overseeing apps like we have for movies or video games. So it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's just so messy, because Google has their own rating system, Apple has their own rating system. The parental controls are all tied into the app age ratings. So if they're getting this wrong, parents can't protect their kids. So that's just the first piece, is the app age ratings piece. We're saying if you are misrepresenting your app age ratings, you can be subject to Utah's deceptive advertising laws. And we also add a private right of action so that parents can sue if their children are harmed.
Melissa, one of the things I want to ask you about with this bill specifically, as I understand it, a big piece of this really comes down to this age verification question. And as I understand it, correct me where I'm wrong on this, but if my kids wanted to download something on their devices, they're currently in real life too young to do this, but as they get older, and for other parents out there, but essentially it would require a parent to give their consent if the primary user, if the child is a minor, obviously, that wants to get something from the App Store. The parent, who's the adult over 18, there's some form of, well, I'm the adult, I'm the parent, and I'm giving them consent. Like, they literally physically cannot download the thing unless someone who has age verified gives the consent. Help us understand kind of how it would work.
Sure. So that a lot of people want to turn that into a content issue. It's not about content, it's about contracts. So every single app comes with a terms of service agreement, and those terms of service agreement can give sweeping access to the whole device, the camera, exact location. It can create ongoing financial agreements with the person. So we're just saying, in every other instance, anytime a child is entering a contract, you have a parent overseeing that, or the contract is unenforceable. So in the case of smartphones and app stores where the stakes are so high, where these apps can access the actual device, we're saying a parent should be overseeing these contracts. So that's where the contracting, the parent oversight piece comes in. And the age verification piece is tied directly to that, because unless you know if the person is an adult or a child, you don't know if they need consent. You don't know if they're the parent. You don't know who's giving consent. So that's kind of tied in right under the contract piece.
Bill, I want to get your take, because something Melissa mentioned about kind of the critics are saying, well, this is infringing on free speech, it's not constitutional. But she mentioned this idea of it's not content, it's contracts. You wrote an opinion piece for the Deseret News recently. I want to read a short excerpt from, then ask you to kind of expound on sort of the constitutional arguments at play. In your piece called "Parents Can't Be Involved in Child's App Downloads, That's a Legal Stretch," which we'll link to in the show notes, you write, SB 142 would not prevent content providers from making and sharing their views, but it would restrict an app store's ability to give children unfettered access to harmful downloads. Simply put, the law regulates the conduct of app stores, not their content. Therefore, it does not impinge on free speech. Can you expand on that a little bit? Help kind of address and maybe put to bed some of those constitutional concerns you've been hearing about.
Sure. Well, I think actually most of this answer is probably more helpful than anything I've said on that, to give a little details about why that's true. And again, Senator Weilers, I mean, there are so many ways in which we appropriately create laws that protect children in various ways. And like Senator Weiler pointed out, we usually don't question those. I mean, the example I always think of is tanning beds. In the state of Utah, you can't use a tanning bed if you're a minor without parental consent. And there hasn't been a concern because nobody thinks of providing a potentially unsafe product to a child as a form of speech, particularly in the way that that's been described, by Melissa. I think one of the things that strikes me as really important is that there have always been some regulations that touch on speech, like deceptive advertising laws, laws against distributing pornography to minors. These laws have been upheld over and over again. The U.S. Supreme Court, just a couple of decades ago, upheld a law that said that a man can't, in his store, in a actual brick and mortar store, can't sell pornography to minors. And so those laws don't all disappear just because we're in a slightly different technological context than we were before. So I don't know if I'm being entirely responsive to your question, but I think that the key thing to understand is that selling things to children has always been appropriately regulated. The Constitution doesn't forbid that, and some of the claims that are made related to that, I think, are often meant to sort of confuse people who don't know a lot about the technology and say, "Oh gosh, well that must mean that that they're going to be collecting all kinds of information." They're already collecting all kinds of information, but doing it in a way that maybe that clearly parents want to be aware of. And I think the bill provides for that by its sort of truth in advertising kinds of elements. But also, if you focus on one sort of very narrow piece where people are trying to communicate their content and miss the reality that much of what we're concerned about has nothing to do with that. Has to do with tracking what children are doing with their phones, accessing contacts on their phones. The U.S. Supreme Court has just recently ruled on this, on a question related to this in the TikTok decision, and recognized that Congress has authority to, when technology is harmful to the country's interest in this case, the state has a valid interest in regulating that. This is just another example of that, and the free speech arguments, the parental rights arguments are really, I think, in an argument I call them a stretch, but I think another way you might say it is that they're really a red herring. They're talking about something that's not.
And I think just to put a point on what Bill is saying is, there are companies that do online gambling. There are companies that sell vaping products, cigars, and direct wine shipments. And none of those companies can sell those products to a 14-year-old girl in Topeka, Kansas. They all understand we have to age verify. And if they did ship any of those products or allow the online gambling, they would be in trouble, and they know that. And this age verification software industry has been around for over a decade. They're very good at it. But for some reason, when you talk about age verifying social media or app stores, then people get weird about it. I'm not sure why.
Well, let's pinpoint for a minute this specific intervention, because again, at times there have been discussion about specific social media apps doing this age verification. As you've said, other providers of other products or services have done this. This bill really focuses on the app stores as kind of the gateway, kind of the grocery store model that you use, Senator.
Well, and I'm going to use another example. Everyone understands if a bar serves a bunch of drinks to somebody and that person leaves drunk and hits somebody and kills them on the way home, that bar is going to get sued. Everybody gets that. It's that's well established 100 years in our country. Likewise, if a 15-year-old walked into a gun store and they sold him a revolver and some ammunition and he goes to the school and shoots it up, everybody's going to understand that gun store is going to have some questions to answer. And both of those, I think, are applicable to the App Store. The App Stores say, well, we're not making the apps, we're just the vendor. Well, the the bar is not making the alcohol. The gun store is not manufacturing the weapons or the ammunitions, but everyone understands that they are the delivery mechanism. And in our society, in those other examples, everyone understands that they're responsible and they're liable.
Can we expand on that analogy a little bit? Because again, I'm trying to think through what people who are concerned or maybe questioning of this approach might say. With those analogies you use, Senator Weiler, there's the alcohol example with drunk driving or the gun store example. In each of those instances, that's somebody going out and causing harm to a different person.
Mm-hmm.
What would be a good analogy for sort of the self-harm? Because a lot of the discussion around social media is, again, anxiety and depression, suicidal ideation, that it's the direct user of that product. How would we sort
Well,
through that?
let's say a 15-year-old went to a gun store then and shot himself, in the parking lot. I don't think that there's a complete disconnect there. But it's a fair point. It's a fair point. But I think I think the Apple and Googles in the world, they're saying, hey, don't target us. Just talk to the 10,000 app developers. Well, first of all, let's be honest. It's easier for the government to target 2 app stores than it is to target every potential future app. So there may be an efficiency or a laziness factor, however you want to categorize that. But I'm also saying I think the person delivering the product to the end user also has a role to play.
I want to read an excerpt from an opinion piece, Senator Weiler and Melissa, that you two were co-authors on, called Perspective, App Stores Are Exploiting Our Children. We Must Change That. So here's the excerpt, and then either one of you would love to hear your kind of expansion on this. You both write, app stores, the digital gatekeepers of our children's lives, routinely treat kids like adults, steering them into accepting exploitative terms of service with billion-dollar corporations. These agreements have the potential to give apps sweeping access to personal data, photos, contact lists, exact locations, even microphones and cameras, all without meaningful consent or oversight. You go on to write, the act requires app stores to verify parental consent before minors can download apps, agree to terms of service, or make purchases, ensuring that parents, not tech platforms, have the final say in their children's digital lives. And the last portion, it mentions a private right of action for parents. So help us kind of think through the argument. Sounds like you're trying to say, well, we're centering parents as the key decision makers here. And then can you explain the private right of action for folks who may not know what that is?
Let me take a first shot at the first part. I like to use a rental car example. So, Nick, you have really young kids, but let's say 5 or 10 years from now, you went to rent a car for Disneyland or whatever, and you're at the counter and they ask you to sign the contract, and then they say, hey, we need your 9-year-old and your 7-year-old to sign this contract as well because they're going to be riding the car. Now, everybody understands that would be ridiculous because a 9-year-old does not have the capacity to enter into a legal contract. Or do they? Because we have 9-year-olds walking around with their parents' old smartphone that they've been handed, and they can download an app, and then the app asks them to agree to the terms and conditions. And those terms and conditions may give the app access to their microphone, their camera. They may be giving permission to collect their data and to sell it. And kids in Utah and every other state are clicking yes on these terms and conditions and entering into what are purportedly binding legal contracts every single day. And that's a big focus of the bill. And I think Melissa can add more to that.
Yeah, so definitely the main thrust of the bill is putting parents back in the driver's seat, because right now Apple and Google have the cutoff for adulthood at age 12. 13 is when they no longer supervise, they no longer require a parent to be attached to the child. So they believe that at age 13, children should have contracting rights, which isn't true. They're kind of projecting off the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which is about, targeted advertising, but it has nothing to do with contracts. So I think deep down they know that the age should be 18, where kids are independent from their parents on smartphones too. And the private right of action ties directly to the deceptive advertising piece, where if a parent allows a download of an app because they believe that it was safe. For example, TikTok, I don't know if you guys followed all that, but a lot of states are suing TikTok right now for harming children. And once those court documents were unsealed, you could see that Apple knew that 12 was the wrong age for TikTok. They said, this is not appropriate, this shouldn't be for 12-year-olds. And you could see the TikTok employees also saying this app shouldn't be rated 12 plus. So for 2 years, they're talking about how TikTok is misrated. And yet they're doing nothing. They leave it as 12 plus in the App Store. And not only that, it was the #1 must-have app. If you went to the App Store, to all the underage kids, it advertised it to them as the #1 must-have app, even though it was misrated. So under this new law, parents could sue for stuff like that.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to go through some of the additional, I guess, kind of counter arguments that we've been seeing online or hearing, or maybe in some of the legislative conversations around this bill, really kind of explore what are the concerns or criticisms that you all are hearing, and then let's go through some of those. But we're going to take a really fast break and be right back. This is Defending Ideas. Stick around.
For a deeper dive into the issues you care about, read Sutherland Institute's official blog, Insights and Takeaways. You'll gain deep insights from policy experts and relevant takeaways voters need to know. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nick Dunn. We're going to continue our conversation about how best to address concerns about minor access to social media and online content, and looking specifically at some legislation to do that through App Store age verification. But before we jump back in, I want to remind you, if you like this conversation, if you're enjoying what you're hearing today, please subscribe to Defending Ideas wherever you like to get your shows, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to click the little bell icon in the corner so you get notified each time a new episode of Defending Ideas is published, which is every Tuesday morning. You can find access to all of that and also previous episodes and clips at defendingideas.org, or just search for Defending Ideas wherever you like to get your shows. So let's continue. I want to ask each of you about some of the counter arguments that we've heard, some criticisms that people offer when they hear about this. And, you know, a lot of people are going to social media, ironically, I guess, to sort of complain. But also there are significant support. In the first legislative committee hearing, this bill passed unanimously, if I remember correctly.
But not without a lot of opposition
Sure.
in the public comment arena.
So robust discussion, but at least the committee gave its support. I want to ask, I'll just kind of play devil's advocate and kind of run through some of the things we're hearing. One of the criticisms that people offer is, well, why can't parents just be parents? Why can't a parent just be responsible and, don't give your kid a phone if phones and online content are bad for kids, or take it away from them, or the kind of that generalized thing, just tell parents to be responsible. Why does the government need to get involved? What do we say in response to that?
Well, when I was a kid growing up in the late 70s and 80s, sometimes if I got off work early, I didn't have a cell phone because they didn't have them then, or if I was at the mall with my friends and we wanted to come home, my mom would say, just call me, collect, and I won't accept it, but I'll know you're ready. And so there are, those payphones have disappeared. But the better thing is that I need to tell you is I'm a family law attorney. So part of my legal practice is divorce law. And there are a lot of situations where parents are divorced and one parent will buy the kid a phone. So when they're with the other parent, they have a way to call them and they don't have to call their ex-spouse, And if the parent that didn't buy the phone, if they take it away, they're often going to go back to court because they're like, now they're interfering with my contact. And I've had clients or opposing parties buy smartphones. Usually it's their old one, the recycled one, for kids as young as 5 and 6. And that might strike you as odd, but it's happening every day in Utah. And so where you have a divorce situation, or even if you have married parents, one of them might say, hey, they're old enough for a phone, and the other one says no. Or you just might have a situation where it's necessary because they can't take the bus, they have to pick up the schools. There's a lot of parents that want their kids to have a phone, even in the classroom, because they want to be able to contact them for doctor's appointments or emergencies, etc.
Melissa, anything to add from your perspective? I mean, that's iterations of that criticism of, well, parents can and should just be responsible parents. Why do you need the government to be involved at all? What's the best way to respond to that kind of question?
I would say, if you think about it, the government's involved in everything. Like, how do you know that your child's car seat is safe? How do you know that your child's baby food is safe, or their crib? Like, they have been involved in regulating everything that touches a child since the inception of government. Like, why not app stores and smartphones?
Can I just add one additional thing? I think a lot of parents want this kind of protection. They don't have always the capacity to understand immediately all the new technology that comes. I mean, I think, maybe as a kind of an older person, this may not resonate to younger people, but when I get a new phone or something, and I'm downloading things that I use all the time, and it says, you need to consent to giving access to all of your contacts, and you think, what am I doing? Is that really safe to do that? Imagine a child having that same experience. Now they know in order to go forward with whatever they're trying to do, that may in some cases be completely okay, but may in some cases not. All they have to do is click yes, and they have no idea of what all that's entailed in that decision to click and say yes, I'll accept that condition to get this app. Parents want speed bumps for their children to get access to these things. But probably many of us want speed bumps for ourselves to get access because we're not quite sure what we're doing. But I think it's unfair to not give parents a tool that I think that they want, and they can express their desire by contacting their legislators, and my sense is that they are, and they're saying to their legislators, this is a good idea. We do want this kind of help in raising our children in a world that is in many ways unsafe and often unfamiliar.
Another one here is why aren't there private sector solutions that would address this? I mean, when I was growing up, I remember the V-chip being a thing for TV, and there were, of course, other parental filters on internet content. Why aren't there, or are the existing private sector solutions sufficient?
I think there are, and I've been approached by several parents. In fact, some of them are state senators, who've said, I've locked down my 16-year-old's phone, and they still find a way around it. But I think that the best private sector workaround is a Gab watch or a knockoff, especially for young kids like 8, 9, or 10, because they can send messages and they can even receive calls from their parents and maybe 2 or 3 approved friends. But I think that, and I'm not trying to be mean because I'll put myself in the same category, I think a lot of parents don't know what they don't know, and so there's an ignorance factor. And I say that because when I ran the filter bill, iPhone and Android phones, most of them came pre-sold with a filter, but it took like 17 steps to turn them on. And A, the parents didn't know the filters were there. B, they didn't know how to do the 17 steps. And C, they just would give up. And then even if they turned them on, the kids would probably know how to turn them off without the parents knowing. And so I do think there's an ignorance factor, and I say that in the most polite and respectful way as I can.
Melissa or Bill, anything else on the private sector aspect? Or I got a couple more kind of devil's advocate questions to run through, but any thoughts on that piece?
I just have one. The way that Apple and Google lock down their ecosystem makes it very hard for third-party, apps to come in and try to monitor and regulate. Like they'll block Bark from getting in Snapchat and certain things like that. So really, the only person who is capable of doing it in a seamless way is Apple and Google on their devices.
And hopefully, I believe that some of these companies will see these kinds of bills and recognize there's a real interest in protecting children, and they ought to act responsibly. So I think it's valuable in and of itself as a message to companies that they ought to act responsibly, and hopefully they'll step up and do that. It's hard to imagine with all the technological advances that have come to this point that they can't figure out good ways to do some of the things that need to be done.
I want to return to a point we had talked about earlier, but Senator, some of the analogies you were making, that to me it seems like really the core of this debate comes down to this question: is social media and online content, is it more like alcohol and cigarettes, or is it more like junk food? Both have a negative impact on the user of the product in different ways and to different extents. One category we regulate, the other category we don't. We just try and encourage through education, well, don't eat Twinkies every day kind of thing. Why does this specific product or service fall into the former category than the latter?
Well, I think it's clearly addictive to most people, including our kids. So that makes it, I'd say, more like tobacco or drugs. And number two, junk food can be eaten in moderation in a healthy way. But 9, 12, 15-year-old kids, their brains are still developing. They don't know how to moderate social media. So unless you have a parent that's, like you get 1 hour of screen time after your homework's done or something like that, they will probably be up under their sheets at night, after they're supposed to be asleep on social media, because that's what kids do.
The last thing I was going to ask, as far as the devil's advocate section of the questions, is what if a parent kind of wants to just say, well, I don't want to have to deal with this. I don't want to be, checking every time my kid wants to download something. Any ideas of how this would work in practice, as far as If a parent says, yeah, just give my kid access to this, they're fine, they're old enough, they'll figure it out. Any insights into what that might look like?
So we dealt with this in one of the alternative bills that was going to give parents the option to turn it off. And what would happen would just be that anything that they didn't give consent for, those terms of service contracts would be unenforceable. So, I guess they could, but then any of the things that they download would be unenforceable as far as the contract. So.
And as a legal matter, there's a number of parents. We don't allow parents to give their kids a right to not go to school or not get educated at least, or to have parties with alcohol at their homes, things like that. I think common sense tells us that there are. If a parent wants to make a decision, they're free to do that. And in this case, they could just say, we accept. We'll show our age verification, and we will allow our kids access to these things. But I think it's a narrow subset of people who believe there's some kind of constitutional right to not be involved in your child's life, and most people don't see things that way. And as a result, I think most people will welcome. The vast majority of parents will welcome this kind of protection.
The last thing I want to touch on, there was another op-ed written by a few state senators here in Utah, Senators Mike McKell, Jordan Tusher, and Kirk Collimore. They have a piece called Taking on Big Social Media, Protecting Kids, One Bold Move at a Time. I want to read an excerpt of that and get all of your comments, and then kind of give our audience sort of some next steps, some what's next, or almost sort of talking points for how to talk about this issue moving forward. These senators write, and we'll again include this link in the show notes as well. They write, since 2009, rates of self-harm among young women have skyrocketed, a trend researchers directly link to the growing impact of social media. With 95% of teens now using these platforms and over a third admitting to being online almost constantly, the data paints a troubling picture. They go on to write, nationwide, 57% of teen girls report persistent sadness or hopelessness, and closer to home, 88% of Utah parents believe social media harms children and youth. Bill, that it seems to tie into something you're saying, that there's probably a broad recognition, and this data supports that, among parents, that this is a problem. And is this just sort of a tool that you've argued it is constitutional, it's perfectly legal, but is this just a tool for that 88% of Utah parents who are really worried about this to feel like they can try to fix it?
It is. And there's really an important cautionary tale that I think is worth highlighting here, and that is when the internet sort of was first kind of a thing, Congress was worried about some of the content that could be available to children, to minors, and others too. And so they enacted some laws to protect children. The ACLU sued, that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, this is Congress could have made a more narrow way of addressing this. They've got other kinds of solutions that would be great. Instead, why don't we just let your parents deal with this? Why don't we just have filters? Now, in 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court is reconsidering that decision, and you've got justices on the Supreme Court who are parents, in many cases, saying filters aren't a good solution. That really didn't work. That rosy picture of, this is all just going to regulate itself, people who have incentives to provide unsafe, addictive, or certainly habit-forming material to kids, we can just take care of that. The answer, I think, our history has shown that's not the case. That hasn't been what happened, and so it's wise for us to act now, again, to empower parents, because this isn't require the state government to go and look at everybody's phones, but to now empower parents, giving them the ability to ask for help when social media companies have done something, or app stores have done something that's not fair. These are common sense protections, and we should allow them to play out and see how that works in practice. And I think again, we'll find that these protections don't hamper people's ability to access things they really should or appropriately can get access to. So.
Well, as we start to wrap up, I kind of want to go around and just get final thoughts of kind of where this issue goes from here. And Senator, maybe we'll start with you. What do you see as next for this issue? How can you equip our listeners to again, defend these kinds of constitutional appropriate interventions for kids?
Well, I think Bill's nailed it on the head. We're not telling apps what they can include in terms of their speech or their content, and I think we have long established. Well, let me put it this way, Nick. When I was in my teenage years, there were a lot of video stores. I think Video Verns in Salt Lake was like this, where you had all your movies, and then there was a little back room, and sometimes they had like the beads, and only adults were allowed back there, and that's where they had the X-rated stuff or the NC-17 stuff. We all understood in the 80s, hey, there's some stuff that kids aren't. You can't go back there. Some of the kids might have snuck back there, but then they get caught. All we're trying to do is kind of reinstall that. And then, the reason we have the movie ratings, the Motion Picture Association of America, is because Congress was making noise about regulating movies, and Hollywood's like, hey, we don't need the government. We can do this on our own. And that's why, the R-rated movies, it says if you're under 17, you can't watch this. And sometimes that's enforced in the movie theater, sometimes they're not. And let's be frank, a lot more people are watching movies at home today. And so that's kind of neither here nor there. But I do think in our core as a nation, we understand that there are some things that kids shouldn't be seeing.
Melissa, final thoughts. Where does the issue go from here? What does our audience need to know as they're watching this or maybe participating in some of these discussions?
Yeah, I would just say that there's really nothing in this bill that these app store companies shouldn't be doing already. So I just think that everyone should be supportive as much as they can. This just cleans up some issues that should have already been cleaned up, makes them more transparent, makes them more responsible. I think it's a great bill, and I'm so grateful for Senator Weiler for running it for us.
Well, we will leave it there. Thank you again, Melissa McKay, Bill Duncan, and State Senator Todd Weiler for being with us and sharing your insights and expertise on this important issue. Appreciate your time here on Defending Ideas.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Melissa. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
We're going to take one more quick break before we leave you with some final thoughts. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. There's certainly a lot of debate around this issue and this specific intervention that focuses on App Store age verification. So here's a framework that you can use if you end up in a discussion about this issue. First, you have to ask the question, what potential impact does unfettered access to apps, social media, and other online content have on kids? As we heard in the discussion today, there are strong research-based arguments that such access can be potentially harmful. Second, if you've established the risk of negative impact on kids, the next question becomes the best way to address it. As our guests pointed out today, there are many laws requiring other vendors of products, like grocery stores, to require ID for access to certain kinds of products. So the kind of intervention we discussed today is in line with precedent. And third, we should always pay attention to how policy can elevate the role of parents. In this case, this kind of bill does that in a way that actually strengthens the role of parents overseeing what their kids have access to. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker who you think might find it interesting. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nick Dunn. We'll see you next time.